All right, Golden State Warriors season preview. Brennan, a team that, speaking of stakes, has a lot on the line every single time they start a new season right now, considering the age of Steph Curry, the age of Draymond Green, the age of Klay Thompson. We are closer to the end than the beginning with this group. They made a big move to get Chris Paul in the offseason. I think hopefully they'll have Andrew Wiggins for this entire season. And I'm going to tell you, I teased this before, my answer for a most important player is Chris Paul. You could go.
Okay.
I think you could go with just say Curry needs to play at the MVP level, and that could be your answer. That would be boring. You could go Klay and say they need him to be a really good version of himself. I think that's boring. Draymond has to hold the defense together. I think you could say that's boring. I think it's Chris Paul because he is the thing they cashed whatever Jordan Poole is in for. That's the aggressive offseason move they made. And I don't exactly know how easy it's going to be to spin out of it if it doesn't work, or it's clear it doesn't work like by the trade deadline or something. I think they need him to contribute. I think they need him to be able to fit in these different lineups that Steve Kerr is saying they're going to have Klay guard power forwards this year. I think there's a lot on Chris Paul. Even if he doesn't start, I think they need him to be a positive, healthy member of this basketball team. And I think emphasis on the word healthy is part of that.
Okay, so 2 questions. Do you think he should start?
No.
And
no.
Okay, me neither. And do you think he can impact this team in a positive way?
Yes.
Because obviously
zero question.
He has to.
Zero question.
Okay,
he can.
So how?
I think number one, I think a ball handler like this to do different stuff with Curry and release some of the burden on Curry in itself has value. I think to quote Draymond, someone who can be kind of an asshole and be a crotchety defender can only help that team in a certain way. I think being another guy who's really motivated, like, look, if you're going to bring in a veteran like this and someone who needs motivation to win a title, who you know this better than me, having covered him up close, I guarantee you Chris Paul's coming in this year like his eyes set on winning and is going to buy into whatever you need him to do. And I just think with where this team is at and with what Poole couldn't do, I understand like this isn't the exact same guy. You're not going to have some of the shooting magic I think that maybe the best of Poole had with Chris at this age. But I think just the ball handling, I think the toughness, I think that some of the shot making, I think the ability to maybe just like some of the middies, I think some of the differentiation of the offense can be a good little wrinkle for this team. I don't expect him to have a lot of that, but I think the moments where Curry's off the floor and Chris is on it, and there's going to be some games where Chris has like 3 middies in the span of like 6 minutes, and it stems the tide of a competitive game. I think that's going to be a big deal. I think he can be a real stabilizing force in a way that this team hasn't had, it feels like, in a long time.
Yeah, to me it feels like people's analysis of them of him on their team, I should say, is through the wrong lens completely. I think that people are talking about him, obviously because he was traded for Jordan Poole, as in the context of like, what can he do versus what Poole gave them. Can he fill that hole? Can he be X, Y, and Z as a scorer, as a shooter, like you were just saying? To me, he's a replacement for Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston. To go back like 8 years. Like he's going to give them what those guys gave them. Mostly Iguodala, I would say. Right? Just a secondary ball mover, smart cog in their offensive machine who, despite their significant difference in size, like can at least be smart and execute on defense enough to play big or small with you and just not make mistakes, make his teammates better, be a good presence in the locker room, all that stuff. I think Chris Paul is those guys much more than he's supposed to be Jordan Poole here. You could even say he's like a replacement for Leandro Barbosa on those original teams. They've always liked that secondary offense, and their team for a while just had Kevin Durant and Steph Curry both to provide that, so they didn't need it as much. And then last two years ago, they kind of just got lucky. I mean, like they obviously were awesome, but like, you know, their team was far from perfect. They just won the title in a season when you didn't need to be perfect to win the title. So I like the Chris Paul answer. I also think he'll make some of their young guys better. I think he'll make some of their older vets better, like Dario Saric or Gary Payton. Like I think he can just kind of raise the floor of some of the non-Steph lineups quite a bit, even though he won't score. So I like that answer. My pick was Andrew Wiggins, though.
Yeah.
which I probably will not be a surprise to you. You know, I talked all last year about Andrew Wiggins. To me, he was the second best player on the Warriors the year that they won the championship, at least in the postseason. I think, you know, we've talked about it a lot, but like what he was as a rebounder, as a defender, and as a shooter for that team was absolutely huge. He is really the only guy you could look at with upside to create offense for himself more than what they got last year, because, you know, even if you feel good about some of their other additions, including Chris Paul, like that's not really what they're going to do, whereas Wiggins can. And in a year where they look like they're going to be playing small quite a bit, his defense and rebounding and physicality is going to be huge. Like you talk about Clay guarding fours, it's like, you know, Wiggins is going to be doing that all the time. You know, guarding Jason Tatum, guarding Kevin Durant, guarding Devin Booker, guarding Jamal Murray, like all the time he's going to have to be dealing with these types of matchups, in addition to needing to be probably the second creator offensively over the course of a season. They did not have him last year, and I think they cannot be their best unless they get a peak Wiggins season this year.
I think that's exactly right. I think Wiggins is absolutely essential. Wiggins is someone they are not winning the title unless Andrew Wiggins is around all year in a really good version of himself. There's just no way around it. They don't have anybody else. Like, Draymond is great, but Draymond at the apex of what he is for Golden State is not someone who has to go defend LeBron or go defend Durant or whatever. They need Wiggins to do that. And they need Wiggins to make a bunch of threes. And they probably, Brendan, I would think maybe it's time you see just a little more on with the ball in his hand from Wiggins just to see what can happen. I think this is a good segue, though, because I want to say that my most important, the player we're going to talk about at the end of the year, I'm going to stake my claim on Jonathan Kuminga Island a little bit here. Okay. I don't know if this is going to be a good or bad thing for him, but I think we're going to find out if he's ever going to actually play. Chris Paul is saying all the nice things about him at Media Day. I don't know if you saw any of that. That's one of the things that was noteworthy. Played 20 minutes a game last year, 37% from three, 52% from the field, 3.4 boards, 1.9 assists, 9.9 points per game. I don't think Steve Kerr fully trusts him based on what we've seen. He has not played a ton of minutes, was not part of the playoff rotation, like barely at all. I think this is just someone whose potential skill set they need to just let go. And it's, I think, time to find out if he can be someone that can be part of this version of this team. Because I think they just need another wing. I think last year showed us that. And this is someone who's not even 21 yet. If you told me that year 3, he finally just something clicks a little bit more and he elevates, would not be surprised at all. This is a time for a Jonathan Kuminga ascension in some way.
Yeah, it seems like what's going to need to click is his mentality more than anything else.
Yeah.
You listen to like Warriors reporters, and like they are very open about the fact that coaching staff, the organization from top to bottom, just doesn't believe that his kind of approach is where it needs to be right now. And like I'm not saying that like I know it, but I'm just listening to the people who are plugged in, and it seems like that's the number one thing holding him back. Because like you said, you with a lot of guys like this, you would look at it and say, oh, they can't shoot yet, but he can shoot. It just seems like he wants to be Jason Tatum. He wants to be Carmelo Anthony. He wants to be Kevin Durant. And I think, can they afford another experiment where they intentionally inject him into the rotation? And like he played plenty last year overall, but can they survive another thing where they commit to him wholesale like they did with James Wiseman last year without it derailing their season? I would say it's probably not going to be as damaging because he's a better player than James Wiseman and doesn't play as important of a position. But I think that they're approaching this season with a lot more urgency. And so I think anybody sort of being a loose part of that will be tolerated less this year, even than it has been in the past. And so I wonder, like, how many minutes does Kuminga play per game the first month of the year? As I think that'll tell us a lot. Mine was Moses Moody. I feel like those are really the only two directions to go with it, in my opinion, unless you're just really huge on Lester Quinones. I think I just kind of trust Moody more, and I think that's mostly just me reading into who I think Steve Kerr trusts more. I think you and I watched Moses Moody's first Summer League game together, Chris, in Las Vegas. And he's always just been somebody who I think physically and athletically is a little bit more intense and forceful than you would guess. Like, he's not just stand in the corner and shoot threes and then kind of play good team defense. He really is a physical guy, and I think has some pop to his game in a way that doesn't get talked about. Has gotten to the rim more than you would guess for a wing in the early part of his career, and played good defense on pretty solid matchups. Like, he guarded LeBron, I believe, at times in the playoff series. So he seems like the guy that I would bet does help them get to some of their smaller lineups without sacrificing defensive intensity and physicality. And probably, I would think, from all the stuff we've talked about, plays more than Kuminga. But I definitely agree with you that the ceiling hit of Kuminga would make them a pretty different team. If this is the year that his mentality just shifts and he starts playing more like Green and Looney, then like a lot more is possible for them, because they suddenly feel like not so small of a team if he's playing with the level of force that he can.
I mean, just think about him, and number one, I think the Moody call is the only other one. You could go, unless you're like a Brandon Pozdemensky guy or a Quiones guy or whatever, like, you don't really have a lot of other options. Like,
you got to do a lesson on that name before you throw it out on the pod again.
0% chance we're gonna do that.
There's like a G in there, like a J. You say it like a J. It's Pajemski.
Pajemski?
Don't ask me how, but that's what it is.
I'm looking at the ESPN roster.
I don't know that language.
Is he Polish?
Sure.
Okay. It's Kuminga or it's Moody, and like Moody is probably the safer bet. I guess I'm just feeling frisky. Moody just feels like someone that Steve Kerr is gonna like actually like trust to play like 25 minutes. Like, he played fewer minutes per game last year than Kuminga did.
Mm-hmm.
The real is the real answer
weird
just,
to think.
Is the real
by
answer,
the playoffs, like you said, one was in the rotation, one was not.
Was the real answer just going to be Gary Payton II's playing like 35 minutes a game, and we're just like, what?
Well, except he is also 35 years old, so he does not get this honorary. He's like 30, so he's not,
I was going to say
not a breakout candidate here.
He is. He's 30.
Yeah.
He is not 35. That's a big difference. That would be very different.
You said 35 minutes, so I was playing off of you. I wasn't literally describing his exact age. Yes, I know he's not 35. His dad's like 50, so if he was 35, that'd be a little scary.
Yeah.
All right, so best lineup. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'll throw with Moody is DiVincenzo's not here anymore, and so that's a big part of why I just expect him to have to play.
They're going to miss him a lot.
So last year, the best lineup for this team was Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, and Kevon Looney, which is not a surprise. I would say one level deeper than that, all their best lineups were big. So this was not a season where Draymond at the 5 lineups really like statistically popped in a major way. When Looney was off the floor, the rebounding, turnovers, and fouling just were out of control bad. Some of that's related to Looney. Some of that's related, the turnover part especially, to the fact that Poole played a lot when Looney was not on the court.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's hard, without being like just cruel, to describe how bad Jordan Poole was last year. Like, he was a genuine suck of a offensive weapon. Like, he made the team demonstrably worse when he was on the court, period. So even not having him, I think, helps, but it's a big question of how they get to those small ball lineups this year and who fills some of those gaps to do it, which is what we've talked about a lot with all of our guys already. So with that all said, who's your best lineup this year?
I'm going to go with what was their best lineup in the playoffs last year, which feels like a little bit of a cop-out, and it's going to discount Chris Paul, but I think just the track record of this lineup is a little bit deeper. It's Steph Curry, ever heard of him? Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, and Kevon Looney. Kevon Looney and Draymond together is just such a pain in the ass for these teams to have to deal with as a front court. They can both do a bunch of different things. They're both incredibly intelligent defenders. Those lineups score like pretty well. They did pretty well in the playoffs, and the defensive rating in the playoffs of that lineup, it was their most used lineup last year. 98.8 defensive rating in the playoffs. That is astoundingly good, and there's no reason to think that cannot just carry over and continue. That is, to me, the lineup, even with the addition of Chris Paul.
Yeah, I went the same way, and it is what they had last year, so not the most hot take here. But I would say on the Looney point, the reason that I think he's in our lineups is I think he's just gotten harder to take off the court. Now, if they had Kevin Durant or peak Andre Iguodala, then like of course we're talking about something different. But the way that he's, I think, raised his IQ over time, where even if he's less mobile than even he was at his peak, which was already reduced because of the injuries that he suffered and everything else, for a guy who has to stay around the paint on both ends and doesn't really score and doesn't really block shots a ton, he's about as good as you could possibly ask for with all those limitations. And so I just think you have to really believe in somebody hitting in a huge way from Moody, Kuminga, or... Let me ask you this. Is there any version... What's the pathway to the Chris Paul small ball lineup with him in place of Looney hitting in a way that becomes the best one?
It's dependent
what would have to happen?
I think it's dependent on two things. Number one, it's dependent on Klay Thompson being able to defend up in a way that I'm just a little bit skeptical of. If Klay Thompson's going to have to like defend forwards, particularly against teams like the Lakers or even Durant on the Suns, I think that's a real problem for Klay. And if that doesn't work, you're just back to playing the two bigs. And I think the Klay thing has to pop. And I think secondly, I think they have the chemistry between Curry and Curry and Chris Paul has to just be like unreal. And I think also the diversification, and I think on top of that, if Chris Paul is finding his spots in those lineups and the offensive numbers are just so juiced, and that contrast that he provides juices the offense, I think it's that and Klay on defense. I think those two things hit, that's the only path to me on paper as of right now, without having seen it yet, obviously.
Sure. Yeah, I think I agree. That and Chris Paul has to take open threes, which will not happen. We don't have to even ask the question.
Can I just play devil's advocate on that for 1 second?
Mm-hmm.
If there's ever a team where he's not the lead guy, and he's just not, where I kind of think I'm okay with Chris Paul sometimes, like doing the Chris Paul thing and not taking every single open three, I think it might be this one. Because if he drives and he collapses defenses and he gets Klay or Wiggins or Curry threes, I'll take that process. Like, that might be okay, I think.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
I say that, and then he's going to pass up like a wide open one in the playoffs, and it's going to like end in a turnover, and we're going to be like, well, here we are, here we go again.
They had a bottom half offense in the playoffs, 10th of 16. So they need him to do something, and I think most of the time that's going to be to take the open shots that are there.
Yeah, it's the simple.
But we'll see.
It's the simplest path. All right, best case.
All right, so one other thing on the lineup note. I will just throw out this one from a fun standpoint. Paul, Moody, Peyton, Kuminga, Šarić, second unit is going to be really fun. Just 5 out, run, well, as much as Chris Paul will run, and make the young guys better. And I think Šarić is just a piece that I want to shout out because I think he'll be really, really good in this system, and he looked really good by the end of the season with Oklahoma City last year. I think he's now like 18 months out from the ACL that he tore, and he should really help this team on a minimum, which will go a long way for them because they did not have size. They miss guys like Bielitsa a lot, even though we didn't talk about it. So, all right, best case, I have a championship.
Yeah, that's the best case. Curry plays at an MVP level, is healthy the whole year. Chris Paul clicks, and this team is a contender for real by the end of the year. What do you think? What do you think their seeding ceiling is in the regular season? Because this isn't a team that should chase wins, right?
I would think so. I mean, yeah, you don't want to be in the play-in for sure, which they flirted with last year. But I mean, this is a team who is 8th in offense and 12th in defense. If they have, we'll talk about this with the over/under, but they got 93 combined games from Steph and Wiggins. So I just think by nature they might win more games, but even without that, they should be chasing it. I think that a top 4 seed is definitely within reach, and they have so many veterans that their kind of floor is, I think, a little higher. What about them versus the Lakers? Because we just did the Lakers preview on Monday. Them or LA for more likely to win a championship this year?
I think they're like their odds difference is like 400 difference. Like I think the Warriors are better favored to win the title. I think they're like plus Warriors at plus 16, Lakers at plus 12, I think, last time I looked. I'd have to double-check
Okay.
that. I'm going to go Lakers just because I think I trust the depth a little bit more. I trust like Reeves and Rui and everyone they've added that I think I go there in a way because I just like we need to see how this Chris Paul thing works and we need to see what Moody or Kuminga is going to be able to provide.
Yeah, I think to boil it down as much as you can, like I think Davis is better than Green or Looney, and I think that Reeves is better than Clay. You know, like I just think
at this point, yes,
the defensive and offensive ceilings are just higher for the Lakers, so I'm gonna lean them.
Yeah,
Worst case for the Warriors, though, I have first round exit.
Same. I think it's playing tournament.
I mean, they went to Game 7 last year.
I mean, look, and they played a Kings team that, again, we should tip our cap to them. They did a great job of holding up in that series and making that competitive, but it did go to 7. And it wasn't a lock they were ever going to win that series. Title odds, by the way, Lakers plus 13, Warriors plus 17.
So while we're talking about the worst case, do you think going into this year, because obviously the other thing lingering is Klay Thompson's injury, do you look at this season, or not injury, sorry, well, recovering from it, but the next contract, do you think that whatever happens this year outside of aggravating that injury would have any impact on their desire to re-sign Klay? Because I kind of think as long as nothing catastrophic happens, it's just going to be about what the number is. I don't actually think like the context of the season and, we were going to pay you, but we only won 44 games instead of 54, so never mind. Like, I think that will be a talking point this year, but I kind of don't think it should be.
All of the posturing they've done publicly about this, to me, would indicate that like you are correct, right? That this is not something where they've been like, we'll have to wait and see. They've kind of just been like, we just need to find the right number. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And for how much. I think that the way they are signaling how this is going to go, I think particularly with the Draymond extension and trading Jordan Poole, I think it's just a matter of figuring out the details. And maybe there's like some protection for the team in there that we're not expecting, but I think we're in a very clear place as far as like he's just going to be a Warrior until he decides he doesn't want to play NBA basketball anymore.
Win total line is 47.5. I have the over.
I do too. I feel a little bit uneasy about that just
Same.
because of the age, just because of maybe they just take it easy at times. I could see that they're winning like 46 and being pretty happy with it, but I would take the over as well.
So they were statistically a 47-win team last year. They got a little unlucky. I think they won 44 total. We mentioned they were 8th in offense and 12th in defense. So I might have that flipped either way. They were near top 10 in both. Let me just walk through how many bad things happened for them last year. They committed to James Wiseman, that experiment, the first month of the year. Went terribly. He was bad. They benched him, traded him, gone. The guy they traded him for, Gary Payton II, had a secret injury that the Portland Trailblazers hid from them, so they didn't get to have him on the court until basically the playoffs. Dante DiVincenzo, overall fairly solid signing, but really inconsistent regular season, did not shoot the ball super well. Horrible year from Jordan Poole. Only 56 games from Steph Curry, which maybe you have to count on in 2023-24, but nevertheless, that's a pretty low-end outcome health-wise. And then only 37 from Andrew Wiggins. So I just think that they solidified the veteran depth here in a way that kind of protects them from the floor coming out. And when you combine that with the fact that I think their best players, who I think are Curry and Wiggins, and obviously Draymond too, play more and probably play better in the case of Wiggins. Like, you're telling me I only have to get one more win out of that and all those things are going to trend in the right direction? I was nervous about it too, and the more I looked at it, I'm like, I just think the vast majority of outcomes lead them to an over here.
The other thing I would add to that is that they were 11-30 on the road last year. Here are the two teams in the West.
Yeah, that whole thing.
The two teams in the West.
The whole road thing.
I went back and read a bunch of stories about this, Brendan, and like tried to figure it out, and it still just doesn't make any sense to me, like at all. It's just a weird thing that they were 33-8 at home and 11-30 on the road. Just bizarre.
You were saying two teams what?
Two teams had a worse road record.
Okay.
Can you guess who they are? And the West of the West.
The Pistons?
Yes, the Pistons would be the other one. So 3 teams overall, but 2 of them were in the West. Who are the West teams?
Spurs and Rockets. I mean,
Spurs
going with the 2 worst teams.
8-33 on the road for Houston and San Antonio, as well as the Pistons, and the Warriors had the next worst road record. Doesn't make any sense.
No. So if that bounces back, like, there's just so many indicators that would tell you they're gonna be closer to a 50-win team, I think, this season. So I would, if I were betting, probably feel pretty comfortable on that one, actually.
Yeah, like if they switch spots in the conference with the Kings and that's like the outcome of the season, wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Those teams just like swap to some degree.
Yeah, the Kings preview I'm looking forward to. That's going to be a fascinating one. I have no idea what to expect.
I have been started my prep for that, Brendan, and I'm very optimistic in some ways. And I'm also like, how much of this is just going to be exactly the same? And they're going to get a little bit lucky. And like, was Deer and Fox. Like, there's just a lot going on there in Northern California. I also do keep seeing the Mike Brown clip of him like yelling, running up, turn on the fucking Jets. I'm like, I love Mike Brown so much. God bless him.